Remakes are often given a bad rap. Whenever some highly regarded classic that people love is announced to be getting the update treatment, you can almost hear the universal disgust. And that reaction isn't without merit. So many of these revisions turn out to be bad, pointless cash grabs, or just seem to miss the point of what made the original so good. Even the decent ones usually fail to live up to the high expectations of judgmental fans. But every once in a while, when all the stars in the cosmos have lined up correctly, a remake manages to be truly good. And even rarer than that, sometimes it manages to surpass the original. Resident Evil came out in 1996 for the PlayStation 1. It's credited with coining the term survival horror, spawned a long-running and massively successful franchise, and has gone down in history as one of the most memeable games of all time.
That was too close. You were almost a Jill sandwich.
You're right.
Resident Evil released for GameCube in 2002 and is widely regarded as one of the best remakes and one of the best horror games of all time. I appreciate both titles and think each are worth playing for very different reasons, but I'm not going to surprise anyone by revealing that I also think the remake is far superior. With the impending release of the new and, hopefully, improved Resident Evil 2 fast approaching, I went back to play both iterations of the first game to remember exactly why the 2002 revamp was so good, and how it managed to be so much better than what came before it. I've compiled my findings into this video to inform, entertain, and rake in some of that sweet, sweet YouTube money. For those curious, I played the Resident Evil HD Remaster on Xbox One and Resident Evil Director's Cut on PS3. Although, side note for the latter, while the PSN store page for the Director's Cut shows this box art, what you're actually downloading is the re-released DualShock edition that most people consider to be inferior. A few cutscenes that were supposed to be uncensored aren't due to a localization error, and all of the music got changed. To me personally, neither of these are huge deals. I only ever played the censored version, so I didn't feel like I was missing anything, and the music is fine. It's inoffensive and does its job without any tracks that stick out to me as being particularly bad. Well, except for this one. Finally, before I get into specifics, let me hit you with a big old spoiler warning. Yeah, I'm talking about two games that came out multiple console generations ago, but I still feel the need to issue a heads up. The Resident Evil remake is something you should go into as blind as possible. It's a tense, edge-of-your-seat experience the first time through, and I would be remiss not to warn off the handful of you that haven't played it to death. The surprises it offers to both new players and even those intimately familiar with the '96 game are truly great, and I strongly advise you stop watching now and go play it first. You'll thank me later. Now that I've gotten all the extended preamble out of the way, let's take a look at Resident Evil and see how it improves on Resident Evil. First, I want to look at the intros for both games because not only are they a fitting representation of the overall tone and experience that you get out of each title, but also because they act as a perfect contrast to one another, showcasing just how different each game really is. So here's the first game.
Alpha Team is flying around the forest zone situated in northwest Raccoon City, where we're searching for the helicopter of our compatriots Bravo Team, who disappeared during the middle of our mission. No, I haven't found it yet.
We open with narration informing us that bizarre murders have been occurring in Raccoon City, and I just noticed after 20 years that the editor of the newspaper failed to spell check his work. And STAR's Bravo Team was sent to investigate. After contact with them was lost, Alpha Team was sent in to find out what happened. Cut to shots of a camera slowly moving through grass, and then the magic begins.
It was Bravo Team's helicopter. Nobody was in it. But strangely, most of the equipment was still there. However, we soon discovered why.
We cut to a shot of Alpha Team staring at an off-screen helicopter wreckage, because, let's face it, they didn't have the budget for an actual set, as the group looks on with mostly bored expressions, with the exception of Chris, who knows that someone farted but can't quite figure out who. The group aimlessly stalks through the grass when suddenly this guy declares that he's found something. His name is,
Joseph!
Ah, right, Joseph. Thank you, Jill. So Joseph bends down to examine what he found, and we see a gun and part of a hand being raised. In this censored cut, it's not really clear what he found. Only in the uncensored version do we see it's supposed to be a severed hand that somehow managed to maintain a death grip on that pistol. And then he's mauled to death by dogs. At least that's what's implied, since all we see are quick cuts of dog puppets and Joseph screaming accompanied by squishy sounds.
Joseph!
The uncensored version is more explicit in showing his actual death, but it's still full of jump cuts and is as messy to follow. Cut to shaky cam of the group running and shooting, again this is all somewhat incoherent, and then we hear the team's helicopter leave them stranded.
No! Don't go!
Weren't you all being chased a second ago? More running, shooting, and shaky cam later, and we finally arrived at the Spencer Mansion. Followed by a showcase of our lovable cast.
Chris Redfield, Jill Valentine, Barry Burton, Rebecca Chambers, Albert Wesker. Resident Evil.
This opening is amazing, and I wouldn't change it for the world, but remember that it wants to be the setup for a horror experience, and it spectacularly fails at that. Weirdly enough, I still think it works because it fits the tone of the actual game that follows it.
Stop it! Don't open that door!
But I don't think that was the intention. It's trying really hard to be scary when it honestly isn't, and the acting is so bad that you can't help but love it in a way that sticks with you. It might not work for establishing a frightening mood, but since the game also turns out to have more cheese than a German deli, it accidentally complements it perfectly.
Joseph!
Now let's look at the remake.
Alpha Team is flying around the forest zone, situated in northwest Raccoon City, where we are searching for the helicopter of our compatriots, Bravo Team, who disappeared during the middle of their mission.
Haven't found it yet?
No, not yet, Brad.
We start in much the same way, with narration explaining the murders and Bravo Team's absence. Then Alpha Team once again finds the helicopter of their missing friends, but this time we get a first-person POV shot of the wreckage being explored, including the body of a pilot, establishing quickly that things have gone horribly wrong.
Save for the remaining body of Kevin.
We then see the various members of Alpha Team split into pairs and slowly search the area.
We continued our search for the other members, and it turned into a nightmare.
We all know things are gonna fall apart eventually, but the situation is given a little time to breathe, allowing tension to build. Joseph, whose name we now know before his demise thanks to the camera view displaying his name, hears rustling in the bushes and goes on alert. We once again cut to his camera view as it falls and blood splashes onto the screen, and when it finally hits the ground, we see the bandana-wearing team member being mauled just off screen. While all this is going on, we hear multiple gunshots as Jill opens fire. We cut to her watching her friend get eaten as she continues to pull the trigger despite her magazine being empty, effectively demonstrating her shock over what she's witnessing, a shock that she's only knocked out of when the pack turn their attention on her.
Come on!
Chris shows up just in time to save her, and they start to run while the hungry canines pursue.
Hey! Brad! Where the hell's he going?
With the dogs catching up, Chris turns to face them, seeming to accept his fate when suddenly the pair is saved by Wesker.
Chris, this way!
Although, knowing how the plot of this game unfolds, I question why he saves them. Wouldn't he want them out of the way? Wasn't that, like, one of his main goals? Anyway, the surviving members of Alpha Team keep running, finally taking refuge in the mansion. That, ladies and gentlemen, is how you set up a horror game. Firstly, you can actually tell what the hell is going on, which is definitely a step up. Tension is allowed to build before the threat is revealed, and the frantic nature of the situation is a constant without having to stop to let poor actors act all melodramatic. I said I liked the intro to the PS1 game, and I do, much in the same way people like Neil Breen movies.
I can't believe you committed suicide. I cannot believe you committed suicide.
But since the beginnings to both the original and the remake are attempting to build up the atmosphere for what is supposed to be a terrifying experience, the remake undoubtedly does a better job. Speaking of atmosphere, atmosphere can make or break anything horror-related. Forget the monsters or the blood or the jump out of your seat moments. Without the proper ambience, all of that can easily fall flat. In this regard, PS1 RE doesn't really hold up. I remember the game creeping me out to a degree when I was a little kid, sure, but nowadays it feels less like you're working your way through a sinister manor full of nightmares, and more like you're taking a tour of a house that just happens to have some zombies in it. Areas are lit brightly for the most part with static lighting, and many rooms and hallways have somewhat bright, basic color schemes. Camera angles still do their job, both purposely disorienting the player as they move through areas and obscuring possible threats so that you stay on your toes. I still found the game fun in a general sense, as the formula works even now, but I can't say I found myself all that intimidated while exploring around. Sure, some of this can be attributed to me being older and being familiar with the layout already, but there are a number of old spooky games that still leave me on the edge of my seat, even replaying them now. One of which, by the way, is the RE Remake. I think the difference is obvious. Share a screenshot from just about any moment in this game to someone who's never even heard of Resident Evil, even one completely devoid of zombies, giant snakes, whatever, and I can practically guarantee they'll be able to tell what genre it's supposed to be. There's a tone of dread and unease to every room, every hallway, and while you can see some rough edges due to aging, especially in the HD remaster such as grainy, blurry backgrounds at times, I still think it holds up for the most part and remains incredibly effective. The only parts of this thing I'd say are in any way bad are the handful of cutscenes that play for scripted events like draining water from the pool or the introduction of the hunters. They look incredibly compressed since they were designed to be seen in a 4:3 resolution, but there aren't many of them, so they ultimately take away very little. Areas are thick with shadows that can sometimes reveal potential threats. Lightning periodically flashes through the windows accompanied by a distant crash of thunder. Cliched, sure, but hey, it still works. Even the camera angles are improved in their own way. Many of them are similar to the original and continue to disorient and obscure, forcing you to listen for the moans and shuffling of undead, but there are others that elicit a greater sense of anxiety, like shots that reveal a new enemy or views from outside a window hinting that something may be watching you. Remember how I said I wasn't unnerved as I explored the original Spencer Mansion? Well, despite searching this version of it top to bottom a handful of times in the past, I still found myself sufficiently spooked as I did so again. Hell, I even jumped a few times because I forgot certain things were coming. This is one of those experiences that demands a dark room and a good pair of headphones. One last thing I feel I should mention in this section is the voice acting.
What? Oh no!
Yeah, I had to bring it up at some point because it's one of the most infamous things about the first game.
It's a weapon. It's really powerful, especially against living things.
The lines these people say and the way they deliver them has been mocked and parodied countless times since its release, and with good reason.
Jill, so you're safe.
That's what I was going to say.
Things that come out of these elite police officers' mouths still manage to catch me off guard with how truly odd and unintentionally funny they are.
I'm sorry, Jill.
I didn't know that was going to happen.
Sorry.
Needless to say, the way these characters act doesn't exactly get the teeth a-chattering, but they're certainly unforgettable, and when you take into account the hilarious intro, they sort of come together to form this amazing zombie-killing comedy.
Chris? Stop it.
The remake lacks this astonishing verbal delight. My memory told me that the voice acting here was really good, like top tier, but honestly it's not.
Rebecca, you okay with the gun?
Yes.
All right. I'm going to continue my investigation.
It's okay, kind of generic really, with only some truly cheesy deliveries here and there that pay homage to what came before.
That was a close one. A second late, you would have fit nicely into a sandwich.
But for what it is, it works. Not only would it be a fool's errand to try and recreate the happy accident that was the writing and deliveries of the original, but it really wouldn't fit the tone of the rest of the game.
Anyway, we better find a way out of here before we turn into zombie food.
Instead, it finds a safe middle ground, neither being all that great or all that bad. That means it doesn't stick with you the same way the OG performances did, but it does its job without distracting from the spooks. Resident Evil is an exceptional time for newcomers of the series, but I'd argue that you'd actually have an even better experience if you've played the PS1 version. Why? Well, while other remakes would be content to call it a day at providing a beat-for-beat recreation of what came before it, RER goes out of its way to subvert expectations constantly, not only tweaking smaller elements, but making some grand changes that catch cocky veterans off guard. The most obvious alteration right off the bat is to the Spencer Mansion itself. There are a number of new rooms, routes, and outside areas that have been added onto the already existing blueprint, meaning even those that know the PS1 mansion backwards and forwards are forced to relearn the layout. The graveyard, the forest area that leads to Lisa Trevor's cabin, this hallway, that hallway, all of these are new places, and what's impressive is that not a single one of these feels tacked on. They're worked into the layout seamlessly and all feel appropriate as if they've always been there. And if you go back to the first iteration of the mansion after playing this, their absence is very much felt. Then there are the adjustments made to specific moments where fans may walk in expecting one thing to happen only for something else to. Sure, some scenes play out pretty much the same way they did before. Barry will still save Jill from being crushed, allowing her to get the shotgun early, and hunters will show up at the same point, but there are a number of little moments between those that are different. I won't go over all of them, but here are a few examples that stuck out to me. In one of the first rooms you search, there's this little area tucked behind a dresser. In the PS1 game, there's a zombie in here on the ground playing dead. If you get too close, he'll nibble on your ankles a bit, but there's plenty of room to walk right by him, pick up what's on the shelf, and leave. No big deal, and it isn't all that memorable of a moment, honestly. In the remake, when you go into the same place, there's nothing. No zombie anywhere in sight, so you pick up what's on the shelf, go back the way you came, and right as you're expecting the camera to transition to an angle that lets you leave the room, your character starts backing up out of your control as they're surprised by a zombie that now has them cornered. Still a minor moment, but now an effective one. Not long after this is a hallway that contains probably one of the most well-known events in the series. In the original, you're moving along, minding your own business, when suddenly dogs bust through the windows and give chase, putting you in an immediate fight-or-flight situation. Everyone knows this bit is coming, so what happens in the remake? And that's it. But clearly something tried to get in and failed, so now you're just waiting for that shoe to drop. Fun fact, now the hungry puppies will only trigger if you come through the hall in the opposite direction. So if you're smart about planning your route, seeing this hallway as a one-way street, you can completely prevent them from ever busting in. If OG Resident Evil taught players one thing, it's that loading screens equals safety. It doesn't matter what horrors you're currently dealing with in a particular room, once you transition into that door-opening void, you're safe from whatever you were just dealing with until you go back in that room. That's the rule. As far as the remake goes, that rule still applies. Except for occasional times when it doesn't. Remember that zombie you left in the bathroom an hour ago? Probably not, but you will when he suddenly walks through one of those supposedly impenetrable doors. Nothing quite makes the hairs stand on end like hearing the distinct sounds of a doorknob being jostled as you walk down a supposedly safe hallway, meaning that at some point something undead and hungry is gonna pop in like Kramer and say hello. It's an occurrence that's few and far between, but every single time it happens, it's surprising and catches you completely off guard. How about the fate of Bravo team member Richard? Before, you find him in pretty bad shape. I mean, just listen to the pain in his voice.
There are terrible demons. Ouch!
He tells you he's been bitten by a poisonous snake, and you have to run to get him serum. No matter how quick you are, Richard dies anyway, because let's face it, a shot wasn't going to do much given that he's practically bitten in half. But now, if you do get him the serum in time, he'll actually survive his wound. Then, if you're playing as Jill, he'll help you out during your first battle with Yawn, and ultimately sacrifice himself to save her. And if you're playing as Chris, you'll find him in the guardhouse basement, where he'll sacrifice himself and become shark food. Either way sucks for Richard, but hey, at least now he can go out like a bro. And of course, I have to bring up Lisa Trevor, an entirely new addition to this game. She's a grotesque creature with a horrifically tragic backstory that is built up to masterfully. You don't know of her existence for quite a while, so the first time you hear the sound of her skulking around off in the distance, there's a reasonably high chance that you'll poop yourself. If you manage to keep your bowels in check then, you probably won't when you're exploring her cabin and are greeted with the sound of the front door opening and closing.
No! God, please, no! No!
What makes her inclusion even better is the impressive level of restraint the game has when it comes to utilizing her. They easily could have had Lisa pop up again and again, stalking you through the mansion like Nemesis, but instead, after your initial contact with her, you don't see her again for hours, and when she does appear, it isn't done with some grand introduction. You're just exploring some tunnels when, oh shit, there she is! It's terrifying, and it's awesome. I think I've made my point. The remake works just fine on its own, but the way it takes someone's previous knowledge and twists it to throw returning players off is as devious as it is brilliant. But there's probably one other surprising element you're waiting for me to bring up. Something that catches everyone off guard their initial playthrough. Something that throws a wrench into everything you know about how Resident Evil is supposed to work. Don't worry, I haven't forgotten about them. I just think they deserve their own title card. Let me walk you through the typical experience of a first-time RE player. You're doing your due diligence, checking rooms, managing inventory, all that good stuff. As you're exploring, you might periodically come across a corpse laying on the floor. Now, since this is a zombie game and you're no fool, you're likely suspicious of these formerly living house guests, but if you investigate, you realize they don't actually do anything. They don't try to grab you, you can't shoot them, they're just there, so you move on, possibly assuming that maybe they're just set dressing. Since this is your first playthrough and you're unfamiliar with optimal routes or general enemy placement, you're more than likely gunning down a fair amount of undead as you go. I mean, why not just remove the obstacle now instead of having to constantly maneuver around it? Doing so sure made things easier in the PS1 game, right? So no harm in doing it now. But you notice those bodies don't disappear either. Well, unless you get lucky and end up blowing their head off, but generally speaking, every zombie you take out remains exactly where they fell. What an impressive technical achievement! The bodies must stay around the entire game! How neat! In one of the safe rooms, there's a high chance you'll find this note that suggests disposing of bodies by setting them on fire. And in the same room, there's a canteen you can pick up for storing kerosene. This may very well raise an eyebrow, but why would you need to burn the bodies? Bullets seem to be working just fine. Maybe you even go the extra mile and test this mechanic out on one of the downed corpses, but it feels like a needless chore. Maybe this note is just for world building and the kerosene is going to be necessary for some puzzle later. That makes sense. So you keep running around, finding keys, opening doors, going about your business. But sooner or later, one of those bodies you've been absent-mindedly running by stands up. And then it runs at you. And your reaction is probably something along the lines of, "Oh fuck, oh fuck, oh fuck, oh fuck!" And that is your introduction to the Crimson Head. Pumping a zombie full of lead might put him on the ground for now, but eventually, he'll resurrect as a faster, more aggressive killing machine. Suddenly, you're overcome with this sinking feeling, because all of those obstacles you thought you were getting rid of are now ticking time bombs that could go off at any point. Better get to work burning those bodies, champ. After all, it's already been a while, and you only have so much fuel. Good luck! I've never heard of someone not jumping out of their chair when these guys pop up during their initial playthrough. It's such an unexpected curveball. This is especially a problem for players like me that tend to hoard items. Whenever I find a stash of supplies, I run back and forth to a save room to fill up my storage chest. At any moment, I tend to have more backup herbs than a Colorado dispensary. But all this time spent running around between 2 or 3 rooms again and again gathering supplies is just more time the formerly dead undead have to turn. In both concept and execution, it's pure genius. The Crimson Heads are the kind of enemy that stick with you, and it's no surprise they're often put on scariest video game enemy of all time lists. I'm actually amazed they were never used again in later entries of the series, but I'm also happy they weren't because now they make the base game all the more special. Admittedly, their menace is lost a fair bit during repeat playthroughs. After all, you're expecting them now and can plan out how to avoid them and learn the best places to burn bodies, but their impact on that first run should absolutely be celebrated. I came up with what I think is a fitting analogy for comparing both versions of Resident Evil. The remake is like Moonlight Sonata. Every piece of it comes together to form a memorable whole that is easy to appreciate and revisit anytime. Original RE is also like Moonlight Sonata, but it's the version you hear before Rebecca has time to practice. The foundation is there, some pieces of it work, and the mistakes add a certain amateurish charm that's fun to laugh at, but when push comes to shove, there's little reason not to go for the more polished composition. So, yeah, the remake is pretty cool. Both on its own and as an updated companion piece to the original, Resident Evil works and is totally worth playing or replaying today for fans of the horror genre. And while my goal of highlighting what makes the remake so good has led me to seeming kind of harsh toward PS1 Resi, I do still think it has value as well. It might not work as a horror game anymore, but for historical reasons and good old-fashioned entertainment, it's still enjoyable all these years later. If you can, I'd say play them both, but if you only have the time or patience to explore one version of Spencer Mansion, then it should absolutely be the one from the remake. Please be good, please be good, please be good, please be good.